The look on my husband's face when his pregnant mistress showed up at our door was priceless. But not as priceless as when I welcomed her in and revealed the private investigator I'd hired was standing right beside her. For months I'd been testing his loyalty, documenting every lie, and preparing for this exact moment when I would slide the divorce papers across our coffee table and finally take back my life. Before we begin, I want to take a moment to thank each of you for being part of this incredible journey. If you're enjoying these stories of empowerment and life-changing moments, consider subscribing. It's completely free and helps us build this amazing community. Let's dive in. The doorbell echoed through our waterfront home on a crisp Sunday afternoon. David and I had been enjoying a rare day off together, something that had become increasingly scarce in our 5 years of marriage. Our relationship had followed the perfect storybook progression: whirlwind romance, fairytale wedding at the Ritz, and the purchase of our dream home in an exclusive neighborhood. At least, that was the narrative David believed. "I'll get it," I called out, setting down the novel I'd been pretending to read for the past hour. In reality, I'd been checking my watch every few minutes, anticipating this moment with a strange mixture of dread and exhilaration. David barely looked up from his laptop, where he claimed to be catching up on work emails. I knew better. He was messaging her again, the same woman who would now be standing on our doorstep. "Sure, thanks, babe," he replied absently, taking another sip from his monogrammed coffee mug, a gift from me on our 3rd anniversary. The one he called thoughtful and perfect, not knowing I had an identical one made for his mistress as a birthday present from him. A present he never questioned purchasing, though the credit card statement clearly showed the charge. My heart pounded against my ribs as I approached our oversized mahogany door. The irony wasn't lost on me that this door, like many things in our marriage, was chosen by David to make an impression. He never knew I'd selected it from my family's lumber company catalog years before meeting him. I smoothed my silk blouse, Valentino, though David thought it was a knockoff I'd splurged on with my modest teacher's salary, and opened the door with practiced grace. Standing on our meticulously landscaped porch was exactly who I'd been expecting: a striking woman in her late 20s with chestnut hair and anxious eyes. Her trembling hands clutched the strap of a Louis Vuitton purse, the same model David had convinced me was too expensive for our budget last Christmas. "Is David home?" she asked, her voice surprisingly steady despite the nervous energy radiating from her slender frame. "I'm Vanessa. I really need to speak with him." Her hand briefly touched her stomach, a gesture I didn't miss. I smiled with a calmness that visibly unnerved her. "Of course, Vanessa. I've been expecting you. Please, come in." Confusion flashed across her perfectly contoured face as she hesitantly stepped into our marble-floored entryway. Her eyes darted around our living room, taking in the designer furniture, the original artwork, the floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the lake. The home David boasted about providing through his hard work and business acumen, as he often reminded our dinner guests. If only he knew that every piece had been selected from my private collection, items I'd acquired years before I met him. If only he knew that the hefty down payment came not from his smart investments, but from my family trust, a trust I had deliberately kept hidden when we met. "You have a beautiful home," Vanessa murmured, clearly uncomfortable. "Thank you," I replied pleasantly. "I'm quite proud of it. I'm Elena, by the way, David's wife." I extended my hand, noting how her manicure matched the shade David had once told me was too bold for someone in education. She shook my hand briefly, her confusion mounting. This clearly wasn't the confrontation she'd been preparing for. "David," I called out, my voice melodic and controlled. "There's someone here to see you." I gestured for Vanessa to take a seat on our Italian leather sofa while we waited. She perched awkwardly on the edge, her eyes fixed on the hallway. I remained standing, smoothing imaginary wrinkles from my pants, When David rounded the corner from his study, coffee mug still in hand, the color drained from his face so quickly I thought he might faint. The mug slipped in his grip, dark liquid splashing onto the pristine marble floor. "Vanessa," he stammered, eyes darting frantically between us. What are you doing here?" The panic in his voice was almost comical. For a man who prided himself on being cool under pressure, another myth he'd constructed about himself, he was coming apart remarkably quickly. "She came to speak with you, darling," I answered for her, my tone pleasant, as though we were discussing dinner plans with an old friend. "Something important from what I gather. Elena, I can explain," he began, defaulting to the script I'd expected. "I'm sure you can, David. You've always been so good with explanations." I smiled again, this time letting a hint of steel show through. But perhaps we should hear what Vanessa has to say first. After all, she's come all this way. Vanessa's gaze shifted between us, her initial confidence clearly shaken by the unexpected dynamic. She'd arrived prepared for screaming, for accusations, for the typical confrontation between wife and mistress. My calm demeanor had thrown her completely off balance. "Please, both of you, sit down," I said, gesturing to the sofa across from my favorite armchair, the one David thought cost a few $100s at a local furniture store, not knowing it was a rare mid-century piece worth more than his monthly salary. David moved to sit beside Vanessa, then thought better of it and chose the adjacent chair instead. His hands were visibly shaking as he set his coffee mug down on the coaster I slid toward him. "Now," I said, settling into my chair with the confident posture of someone about to begin a business meeting rather than a confrontation about infidelity, "I believe you have something important to tell us, Vanessa." Vanessa shifted uncomfortably, on the Italian leather sofa, her eyes darting between David and me. The confident woman who had marched up to our door moments ago seemed to be rapidly recalculating her approach. I could almost see the thoughts racing behind her carefully applied makeup. This wasn't how confrontations like this were supposed to unfold. She began, before faltering. Her hand moved instinctively to her stomach again. "David and I have been seeing each other for almost a year," she finally stated, lifting her chin slightly in a show of defiance. I nodded encouragingly, as though she were a student in my classroom who had finally worked up the courage to present in front of the class. "Please continue," I said softly. David's knuckles whitened as he gripped the armrests of his chair. "Elena, this isn't—" "David," I interrupted gently. "Let Vanessa finish. It's the polite thing to do." He fell silent, sweat beading visibly on his forehead despite the perfectly calibrated climate control system, the one he'd boasted about installing himself, never knowing I'd arranged and paid for the high-end upgrade through my family's construction connections. "I'm pregnant," Vanessa blurted out, her voice cracking slightly. "Almost 3 months along. David's the father." I watched David flinch at the words, his eyes pleading with me to understand, to forgive, to maintain the comfortable fiction of our life together. But I wasn't interested in his silent pleas. Not anymore. "I see," I replied, my tone remaining conversational. "And I assume David has been telling you he'll leave me once the time is right?" Vanessa's eyes widened slightly. This wasn't the hysterics she'd been prepared for. "He said there were complications, with your finances being intertwined, that you'd fall apart without him." Her voice grew smaller with each word. I allowed myself a small laugh, not cruel, just genuinely amused. "Did he now? How considerate of him to worry about my financial stability." David leaned forward, desperation etched across his features. "Elena, baby, this is just a misunderstanding. Vanessa and we made a mistake. It didn't mean anything." "A year-long mistake that resulted in a pregnancy," I clarified, raising an eyebrow. "That's quite a substantial nothing, wouldn't you agree?" Vanessa's expression hardened slightly. "He told me you were cold, distant, that you couldn't have children." That your marriage was essentially over, but you were too fragile to accept it. Each lie landed like a perfectly aimed dart, but not in the way either of them expected. Every fabrication David had spun only confirmed what I already knew, what I had documented meticulously over the past 8 months. How fascinating, I replied, reaching for the sleek leather portfolio I'd placed on the side table earlier that morning. David has always had such a creative imagination. It's one of the qualities I admired when we first met. David's eyes tracked my movements with growing alarm. What are you doing? Just providing some context for our guest, I said, opening the portfolio. Since we're all being so honest with each other today. I removed a stack of photographs and placed them on the coffee table between us. The top image showed David and Vanessa entering a hotel, his hand possessively on the small of her back. The timestamp in the corner read, March 15th, our anniversary. I've always appreciated documentation, I explained, spreading the photos in a neat line. It's a habit from my teaching days. Keeping detailed records helps prevent misunderstandings. Vanessa reached for the photos with trembling fingers, her eyes widening as she flipped through them. David and her at restaurants, at a concert, shopping for jewelry. Moments they thought were private, captured with professional clarity. You had me followed? David's voice rose, indignation flaring. You invaded my privacy? I met his gaze steadily. Is that really the moral high ground you want to claim right now, David? Vanessa was still looking through the photos when she froze, holding up one in particular. Who's this? She asked, her voice suddenly small. The photo showed David with his arm around another woman, not Vanessa, not me, entering a different hotel on a different day. That would be Jessica, I said calmly. From his office, there are also photos of David with Megan from his gym and Sophia from the charity gala last winter. I paused, watching comprehension dawn on Vanessa's face. You weren't the only one who believed they were special, Vanessa. David surged to his feet, his face flushing with anger. This is ridiculous. You've been spying on me? For how long? 8 months, 2 weeks, and 3 days, I replied precisely. Ever since I found the receipt for a diamond bracelet I never received. A teacher's salary doesn't afford much, as you frequently reminded me, but it can cover a decent private investigator, when properly motivated. Vanessa's hand had dropped protectively to her stomach again, her eyes now filled with uncertainty as she looked at David. You said I was the only one, she whispered. He says that to everyone, I explained gently. It's part of his pattern. You can't possibly believe this, David said to Vanessa, gesturing dismissively at the photos. She's clearly manipulated these to drive us apart. She's obsessed, controlling. Actually, a new voice interrupted from the hallway. The photos are authentic. I took them myself. All 3 of us turned to see a man in his 50s stepping into the living room, his professionally neutral expression belied by the slight satisfaction in his eyes. Roger Dawson, private investigator, he introduced himself with a slight nod. David's face went from red to ashen in seconds. You brought him here? Now? I invited Roger to join us today, I confirmed. I thought his expertise might be valuable for this conversation. Roger moved to stand beside my chair, setting his own leather portfolio on the table. Mrs. Carter has been my client for some time now, he explained professionally. Everything has been documented according to legal standards and would be admissible, in court if necessary. Vanessa looked down at the photos again, then back to David, hurt and confusion warring in her expression. You said you loved me. You said we would be a family. He said similar things to Jessica, Megan, and Sophia, I noted. Though you're the first he's gotten pregnant, as far as we know. David ran a hand through his meticulously styled hair, desperation replacing anger. Elena, baby, we can work through this. I made some mistakes, but our marriage, I interrupted. was over the moment I confirmed my suspicions. Everything since then has been careful documentation and preparation. I nodded to Roger, who withdrew several more documents from his portfolio. Official-looking papers with post-it notes marking signature lines. "What are those?" David asked, though his tone suggested he already knew. "Divorce papers," I answered simply. "Already reviewed by my attorney." "Your attorney?" David laughed, though it sounded hollow. "On a teacher's salary?" And there it was, the perfect opening I'd been waiting for, the culmination of 5 years of playing a role, of allowing David to believe the narrative he'd constructed about who I was, what I was worth, and what I could do. "About that," I said, setting down my glass of water, "there are a few things about me you never bothered to learn, David." I turned slightly toward Vanessa. "He doesn't know, you see. None of them ever did." "Know what?" she asked, drawn into the conversation despite herself. "That I'm not actually a public school teacher," I explained calmly. "I own the Carter Educational Foundation. We operate 17 private schools across the country. Teaching is something I do because I enjoy it, not because I need the income." David's jaw literally dropped. "What are you talking about? Your family runs a lumber yard in Wisconsin." "My family's lumber business was sold when I was in college," I corrected him. "The proceeds funded my first school. The Carter and Carter Educational Foundation is my maiden name." I watched understanding slowly dawn on his face, the gradual recalibration of everything he thought he knew about our relationship, about me. "The house?" he asked weakly. "Mine. Purchased before we met." "The furniture you said was from your grandmother?" "My personal collection. Some pieces are on loan too." "Museums when we travel." "My Mercedes?" "A company car from my fleet." Each revelation seemed to physically diminish him, his shoulders slumping further with every shattered illusion. Vanessa looked between us, comprehension dawning in her eyes. "So, when he told me you were financially dependent on him, a complete fabrication," I confirmed. "Like most things David has told both of us." "Why?" David finally managed. "Why pretend to be someone you're not? Why marry me if you knew—" "I didn't know at first," I clarified. "When we met, I was genuinely charmed by you. But after my last relationship ended with a man who was only interested in my money, I decided to keep my background private until I was sure about your character." I paused, letting the implication sink in. As it turns out, that was a wise decision. The silence that followed my revelation was profound. Outside, through our floor-to-ceiling windows, life continued uninterrupted. Birds soared over the lake. Neighbors walked their pedigree dogs. Gardeners tended to immaculate landscaping. But inside our meticulously designed living room, David's world was collapsing in on itself. "You've been lying to me for 5 years," he finally said, attempting to regain moral footing. I tilted my head slightly. "I simply allowed you to believe what you wanted to believe. You never asked about my family's business beyond the superficial details I offered. You never questioned how a struggling teacher could have such refined taste in art and furniture. You were too busy constructing a narrative where you were the successful provider, and I was the grateful recipient of your generosity." Roger shifted, slightly beside me, a subtle reminder of his presence. The investigator had witnessed countless domestic confrontations, but even he seemed captivated by the unfolding drama. "All this time," David continued, gesturing around the room, "you let me think I was taking care of you." "And all this time," I countered, "you were cheating on me with multiple women while convincing each of them that I was the problem in our marriage." I turned to Vanessa, whose shocked expression had melted into something more complicated, a mixture of embarrassment and dawning understanding. "I'm truly sorry you've been caught in this. Your pregnancy is very real, and so is your relationship with my husband, however misrepresented." Vanessa's hand remained protectively over her stomach. I don't understand. If you knew about me, about all of us, why didn't you confront him sooner? Why the elaborate setup? It was a fair question, one I had asked myself repeatedly over the months of surveillance and documentation. At first, I needed to be certain, I explained. One indiscretion might have been forgivable. But as the evidence mounted, I realized this wasn't a momentary lapse, but a pattern of behavior. I glanced at David, who had sunk back into his chair, his earlier bravado evaporating. And once I understood the extent of his deceptions, I wanted to ensure I had irrefutable documentation for what would come next. The divorce, David muttered, eyeing the papers still sitting on the coffee table. Yes, I confirmed. But not just that. There's also the matter of the Carter Foundation's missing funds. David's head snapped up, alarm flashing across his features. What missing funds? I nodded to Roger, who extracted another file from his portfolio. This one thicker than the others, filled with financial statements, bank records, and transaction logs. When I realized the extent of your infidelity, I continued, my voice remaining steady. I had our financial team conduct a thorough audit of all accounts to which you had access. It seems that your taste for luxury extended beyond hotels and jewelry for your companions. Roger placed several highlighted statements on the table. David's corporate credit card bills showing lavish dinners, weekend getaways, spa treatments, all coded as business expenses for the foundation. Small indulgences at first, I noted. A dinner here, a weekend there. But over the past 2 years, it escalated to significant amounts. Money intended for educational programs, teacher training, student scholarships, diverted to fund your double life. That's ridiculous, David sputtered, though his eyes couldn't meet mine. Those were legitimate business expenses. Donor meetings, networking events. With Jessica at the Four Seasons? I asked, pointing to a specific highlighted entry. Or perhaps Sophia was a potential donor during your weekend in Aspen. I shook my head. The foundation keeps meticulous records of all legitimate business contacts. None of these align with actual foundation activities. Vanessa had gone very still, her earlier distress transforming into something harder as she stared at David. You used charity money to take me to Catalina Island? It wasn't like that, David insisted, his voice rising with desperation. Elena is twisting everything to make me look bad. The records speak for themselves, Roger interjected, his professional tone cutting through David's protestations. Mrs. Carter has already filed a formal report with the appropriate authorities. The Foundation's board has been notified and is cooperating fully with the investigation. The color drained from David's face for the second time that afternoon. You reported me to the police? Financial fraud involving charitable organizations is a serious offense, I explained calmly. The Foundation serves thousands of students. Every dollar diverted impacts their educational opportunities. You're going to send me to jail? His voice cracked on the last word. After 5 years of marriage? 5 years during which you systematically deceived me, betrayed my trust, and embezzled from my foundation, I corrected him. The legal consequences aren't my doing, David. They're the natural result of your choices. Vanessa stood abruptly, her composure finally breaking. I can't believe this. All those times you told me you were working late for the foundation, you were actually stealing from it? David's eyes pleaded with her. Vanessa, baby, you don't understand. I understand perfectly now. She cut him off, gathering her purse. You're not just a cheater. You're a thief, too. She turned to me, unexpected, respect in her gaze. I'm sorry. I truly didn't know who he really was. Who you really were. I would never have. She trailed off, gesturing helplessly. I know, I assured her. That's why I wanted you here today. You deserve the truth, especially now that you're carrying his child. Roger cleared his throat discreetly. Mrs. Carter, there's also the matter of the trust fund. David's head whipped around. What trust fund? I sighed, setting down my water glass. This part was necessary but carried its own sort of sadness, the final demolition of the illusions David had built around himself. When we married, I began, you insisted on a prenuptial agreement to protect your assets. I agreed, but added, a clause you apparently never read carefully. I extracted another document from the portfolio, our prenuptial agreement with specific sections highlighted. In the event of infidelity, the wronged party is entitled to establish a trust fund from joint assets for any children resulting from extramarital relationships. David's confusion was almost comical. But we don't have joint assets. I put everything in my name to protect us from liability. Everything you thought was yours, I corrected. The vacation property in Colorado, the boat you bought last summer, your investment portfolio, all purchased with foundation funds that were properly allocated to you as compensation, but subject to our prenuptial terms. I turned to Vanessa, whose eyes had widened. What this means, practically speaking, is that your child will be provided for, regardless of what happens with David. The trust will cover educational expenses, health care, and a reasonable stipend. Until they reach adulthood. Vanessa sank back onto the sofa, overwhelmed. I wasn't after his money. I believe you, I said simply. But the child deserves security, and David's financial future is uncertain at best, given the pending charges. David surged to his feet, desperation giving way to anger again. You can't do this. You've been planning this all along, setting me up, trapping me. No, David, I replied evenly. You set yourself up. You created this situation with every lie, every betrayal, every misappropriated dollar. I simply documented it. Roger smoothly positioned himself between David and me, a subtle reminder that any aggressive move would be witnessed and recorded. This is insane, David continued, pacing now. No one will believe this. I'm the public face of the foundation. I speak at the events, I meet with the donors, You played a role, I interrupted. A role that can be filled by someone with actual integrity. The board has already approved an interim replacement while we manage this transition. David stopped pacing, suspicion dawning on his face. How long have they known? How long have you been planning this? The board was informed yesterday, I answered honestly. As for my planning, I considered the question. I suppose it began the day I found that receipt 8 months ago, though it became more structured once the pattern of behavior emerged. 8 months, he repeated, incredulous. You've been watching me, documenting me for 8 months, and I never noticed? You were too preoccupied with maintaining your various relationships, I pointed out. Too confident in the fiction you'd created, about our marriage and my dependence on you. Vanessa had been quietly absorbing everything, her initial shock giving way to a cold clarity. So what happens now? She asked, addressing me rather than David. I appreciated her practical approach. Now, several things happen simultaneously. The divorce proceedings begin today. The Foundation's legal team will work with prosecutors on the financial fraud case. And you, I looked directly at her, will need to decide how involved you want David to be in your child's life, given everything you've learned. David made a choked sound of protest, but Vanessa ignored him, meeting my gaze instead. And the trust fund? How does that work? My attorney will contact you this week with the details, I explained. The funds will be placed in escrow immediately, managed by an independent trustee until the child reaches adulthood. Your reasonable living expenses during pregnancy and early childhood will also be covered. Why would you do this? She asked quietly. After the child is innocent, I said simply. And women should support each other, especially when men like David work so hard to pit us against one another. David's face contorted with anger and desperation. This is all so you can control everything, isn't it? The perfect Elena Carter, so generous and forgiving, while painting me as the villain. "I'm not perfect, David," I replied, a genuine sadness finally entering my voice. "I married you believing in our future together. I ignored early warning signs because I wanted our relationship to be real. My only control now is ensuring that your actions have appropriate consequences for you, for Vanessa, for her child, and for the foundation that bears my family's name." Roger's phone buzzed quietly. After checking the screen, he gave me a subtle nod, our prearranged signal that the final pieces were falling into place. Perfect timing, as always. "You've always been controlling," David continued, his voice rising as he grasped for narrative control. "This whole foundation owner revelation is just another way to manipulate everyone around you. Vanessa, don't you see what she's doing? She's trying to buy you off, to control you like she's tried to control me." Vanessa looked between us, uncertainty flickering across her face. For a moment, I could see her weighing his familiar charisma against the mountain of evidence before her. "Is that why you created fake email accounts to contact all your women?" I asked calmly. "To maintain control?" David froze mid-gesture. "What are you talking about?" I turned to Roger, who produced another file from his seemingly bottomless portfolio. "We've documented 17 different email addresses you've used for correspondence with various women over the past 3 years," he explained professionally. "Each with its own password and recovery phone number, all linked to untraceable messaging apps." "That's an invasion of privacy," David sputtered. "In a normal situation, perhaps," Roger acknowledged. "But in the context of financial fraud investigations, electronic communications become relevant evidence." I watched understanding dawn on Vanessa's face. "The burner phone," she murmured. "The one you only used to contact me. You said it was because your work was sensitive." "The foundation does handle sensitive information," I confirmed. "Student records, donor information, grant applications. None of which explains why my husband would need multiple private communication channels unless he was hiding something." David turned to Vanessa, desperation evident in his eyes. "Don't let her turn you against me. We're having a baby together. We have plans, a future." "Plans that conveniently never materialized," I interjected softly. "How many times did you promise to leave me, Vanessa? How many deadlines came and went?" The pain that flashed across her face told me everything. "You said after the Austin conference," she whispered to David. "Then after the fiscal year ended. Then after the holiday fundraiser." "There were complications," David insisted. "Elena's family connections, the foundation's public image. The real complication," I cut in, "was that leaving me would mean losing access to the lifestyle you'd grown accustomed to. The travel, the credit cards, the social standing." The doorbell rang, interrupting David's brewing retort. Roger moved to answer it with practiced efficiency. "Who's that?" David demanded. "More of your ambush witnesses?" "Actually," I said, rising from my chair, "that would be the foundation's financial director and legal counsel. We have a board meeting in an hour to formally address the situation." Roger returned, accompanied by 2 people. Marcus Chen, our silver-haired financial director who had been with the foundation since its inception, and Sophia Winters, our lead attorney, whose sharp eyes missed nothing as she surveyed the room. "Elena." Marcus greeted me with a respectful nod before his gaze hardened as it landed on David. "Mr. Carter." "What is this?" David demanded. "Some kind of intervention?" "This," Sophia replied coolly, setting her briefcase on the side table, "is the formal notification of your termination from the Carter Educational Foundation, effective immediately." She extracted a document and held it out to him. "This outlines the evidence of financial misconduct, the Foundation's intent to pursue full restitution, and the criminal charges being filed." David didn't take the document, his hands clenching into fists at his sides. "You can't fire me. I'm the face of the foundation. The donors love me." "The donors," Marcus said evenly. Appreciate integrity and transparency above all. We've already briefed our major supporters about the situation. They understand that one individual's actions don't reflect the Foundation's mission or values. I watched David's face as the reality of his situation finally began to sink in. The carefully constructed image he'd maintained, successful executive, philanthropist, charming husband, was crumbling before his eyes. "My office," he began, "has already been secured," Sophia confirmed, checking her watch. "Your access to all Foundation systems was revoked at noon. Your personal items will be packed and delivered to whatever address you provide, once we've ensured no Foundation property is among them." David turned to me, incredulity giving way to fury. "You planned all of this down to the minute, didn't you? The confrontation, the revelations, the timing. It's all been orchestrated." "Yes," I acknowledged simply. "Just as you orchestrated your relationships, your lies, your theft. The difference is, my orchestration was in service of truth and accountability, not deception." Vanessa had risen from the sofa, gathering her purse with trembling hands. The confident woman who had arrived, determined to stake her claim, had been replaced by someone more uncertain, yet somehow stronger. "I should go," she said quietly. I crossed to her, careful to maintain a respectful distance. "You don't have to leave yet. There's more you should know about the provisions being made." She hesitated, then nodded slightly. "Thank you, but I need some time to process all this." She glanced at David, who was now arguing in hushed, urgent tones with Sophia about the contents of the termination notice. "I've been living in a fantasy, haven't I?" "We both were, in different ways," I acknowledged. "But that ends today." I reached into my pocket and handed her a business card. Not my Foundation card with its elegant logo and formal title, but my personal card with my private number. "When you're ready to discuss the trust arrangements, or if you need anything, at all related to the pregnancy, please call me directly," I said. "Whatever happens between you and David going forward, I want to ensure the child is provided for." She accepted the card, studying it for a moment before tucking it into her purse. "Why are you being so decent about this? Most women would hate me." I considered her question carefully. "Because hating you would be misplacing responsibility. You didn't make vows to me. You didn't build a life with me based on lies. You're as much a victim of David's manipulations as I am, just in a different way." Across the room, David's voice rose again as he argued with the Foundation's representatives. "This is character assassination. I've given 5 years to this organization and diverted approximately $342,000 of its funds for personal use," Marcus replied calmly, consulting his tablet. "Every dollar of which will be accounted for in the restitution agreement." The figure seemed to stun David into momentary silence. Evidently, he hadn't realized the full extent of his misappropriation, or hadn't expected us to track it so precisely. Vanessa's eyes widened at the amount. "I had no idea," she whispered. "All those trips, the gifts." "I know," I assured her. "Which is why you're not implicated in any of this. You were deceived about the source of the funds, just as you were deceived about the nature of his marriage." She nodded slowly, then straightened her shoulders with newfound resolve. "I need to go now, but I'll call you about the trust, and maybe—" She hesitated. "Maybe we could talk, woman to woman, once I've had time to think." "I'd like that," I said, surprising myself with the sincerity of my response. As Roger escorted Vanessa to the door, David broke away from his intense conversation with the Foundation representatives and attempted to follow her. "Vanessa, wait! Don't let them turn you against me. We can still—" "No, David," she interrupted, her voice stronger than it had been all afternoon. "We can't. Not after this." She turned to face him fully. "You stole from a children's charity? To impress me? What kind of father would that make you to our child?" The question hung in the air between them, unanswerable. Without waiting for his response, she nodded to Roger and walked out the door, her exit as dramatic in its quiet dignity as her entrance had been in its bold confrontation. David watched her leave, then turned back to me, desperation giving way to a cold fury. "You've destroyed everything," he hissed. "My reputation, my career, my relationship. You destroyed those things yourself," I corrected him. "I merely documented the destruction." Marcus cleared his throat diplomatically. "Elena, we should leave for the board meeting soon. The audit team is standing by with their preliminary findings." David laughed bitterly. "Of course, the perfect..." Elena Carter, always on schedule, always in control. He gestured around our living room. "Enjoy your victory and your precious foundation. But remember, you're the one who lied about who you really were for 5 years. You're no better than me." I considered his accusation, feeling the weight of the wedding band I still wore, the last physical symbol of the life we'd supposedly built together. "There's a fundamental difference, David," I said finally, twisting the ring off my finger and placing it on the coffee table between us. I concealed aspects of my identity because past experience taught me that men often wanted me for my money rather than myself. I needed to know you loved me for who I was, not what I had. I met his gaze directly, allowing him to see the genuine pain behind my controlled exterior. You, on the other hand, constructed elaborate deceptions to maintain multiple relationships, while stealing from a charitable organization. Our deceptions were not morally equivalent, and I think you know that. "The divorce papers require your signature," Roger interjected, indicating the documents still waiting on the coffee table, "unless you prefer to have them formally served at a later date, possibly at your next court appearance." It was a calculated remark, reminding David of the public humiliation that awaited him if he continued to resist. After a moment of tense silence, he snatched up a pen and scrawled his signature across the indicated lines, his movements jerky with suppressed rage. "There. You win, Elena. You always do." He tossed the pen down and looked around the house that he now understood had never truly been his. What am I supposed to do now? Where am I supposed to go? For the first time that afternoon, I felt a flicker of genuine pity for him. Despite everything, we had shared 5 years together, years that had meant something to me, even if they had been built on an unstable foundation. "The guest house is yours until you make other arrangements," I said, surprising everyone in the room. "It's isolated from the main property, has its own entrance, and is fully furnished. You'll have privacy while you figure out your next steps." David blinked, clearly not expecting this concession. "Why would you—" "Because despite everything—" "I did love you once," I interrupted gently, "and because cruelty has never been my goal. Justice? Accountability? Yes, but not cruelty for its own sake." The Foundation's boardroom felt like a sanctuary after the emotional intensity of the confrontation at home. 16 floors above the city, its wall-to-wall windows offered a panoramic view that had always helped me maintain perspective. Today, I needed that perspective more than ever. "The board is ready when you are, Elena," Marcus said gently, touching my elbow as we stepped off the private elevator. He had been my father's closest advisor before becoming mine, and the concern in his eyes was genuine. "Are you sure you want to do this today? We could postpone until—" "No," I interrupted, smoothing my blouse. "Delaying would only fuel speculation. Better to address everything directly and move forward." Sophia, walking on my other side, nodded approvingly. "The legal team has prepared a comprehensive briefing. Everything is documented, contextualized, and actionable." I smiled at her efficiency. Sophia had been one of my first hires when I expanded the foundation, a brilliant attorney who had turned down lucrative corporate offers to work for an educational nonprofit. She understood that true power lay in creating systems that outlasted individual failures. "And Vanessa?" I asked Roger, who had accompanied us to the Foundation headquarters. She got home safely? Yes, he confirmed. I had one of my people follow at a discreet distance to ensure she wasn't pursued. She went to her apartment, packed a bag, and is now at her sister's place across town. I nodded, relieved. Keep someone available to her if she needs anything. No surveillance, just support if requested. Already arranged, Roger assured me. And David remains at the guest house. Security confirms he's made several phone calls but hasn't left the property. Taking a deep breath, I pushed open the boardroom doors to face the 12 men and women who helped govern the foundation my father had envisioned and I had built. Some had known me since childhood. Others were more recent additions, selected for their expertise in education, finance, or nonprofit management. All of them looked up as I entered, their expressions ranging from concern to curiosity. Walter Chen, our board chairman and Marcus's older brother, rose immediately. At 72, Walter retained the commanding presence that had made him my father's most trusted friend and advisor. "Elena," he greeted me, his deep voice carrying the weight of decades of wisdom. "The board has been briefed on the preliminary findings, but we'd appreciate hearing directly from you." I took my customary seat at the head of the mahogany table, feeling the absence of David's usual place to my right. For 5 years, he had sat beside me at these meetings, charming the board with his eloquence while I provided the substance. The empty chair was a stark reminder of how completely our carefully constructed reality had shattered. "Thank you, Walter," I began, my voice steadier than I expected. "As you've been informed, today marks a significant transition for both the Foundation and for me personally. I appreciate your willingness to convene on such short notice." I paused, looking around the table at these people who had trusted me, who had, at my recommendation, welcomed David into our organization and given him responsibilities far beyond his qualifications. "I owe you all an apology," I continued. 5 years ago, I introduced David as my husband and recommended him for a position within the Foundation. I believed in his integrity, his commitment to our mission, and his loyalty to me. I was wrong on all counts, and the Foundation has suffered as a result. Margaret Winters, our oldest board member and former university president, shook her head, firmly. "Elena, you don't owe us an apology. We all approved his appointment. We all failed to see the warning signs." "Nevertheless," I insisted, "as founder and CEO, the ultimate responsibility is mine. Which is why I've taken decisive action to address the situation and limit any further damage to our mission." I nodded to Sophia, who distributed comprehensive packets to each board member. These documents detail the full extent of David's financial misconduct, the legal steps being taken, and the structural changes we're implementing to prevent similar situations in the future. The room fell silent as the board members flipped through the meticulously organized evidence, credit card statements, expense reports, bank transfers, all highlighted and annotated to show the pattern of misappropriation. Richard Donnelly, our newest board member and a former prosecutor, whistled softly as he reviewed the materials. "This is extensive. How long has this been going on?" "The first documented instance was approximately 3 years ago," Marcus replied, consulting his notes. "Small amounts initially, carefully disguised as legitimate expenses. The frequency and amounts increased significantly over the past 18 months. "And he really thought he wouldn't get caught?" Margaret asked, genuine bewilderment in her voice. "In an organization that audits every penny spent on children's programs?" I smiled ruefully. David believed what many privileged people believe, that rules are flexible for those with the right connections. He also significantly underestimated me and this foundation. Walter closed his packet, his expression grave. "Elena, while I'm deeply troubled by these revelations, I'm equally concerned about you personally. You've experienced a profound betrayal, both professionally and personally. Have you considered taking some time away?" The question was asked with genuine care, but I couldn't help noticing how differently this conversation might have gone if our genders were reversed. Would a male CEO be asked if he needed time away after discovering his wife's infidelity? "I appreciate your concern, Walter," I replied carefully, "but the foundation needs steady leadership now more than ever. I intend to be more involved, not less, as we navigate this transition." Richard leaned forward, his prosecutor's instincts evident in his precise questioning. "The legal strategy outlined here is comprehensive, but have you considered the public relations implications? David has been the public face of several major initiatives. His sudden disappearance will raise questions." "We've prepared for that," Sophia interjected, turning to the communications section of the packet. "A statement has been drafted announcing David's departure due to personal and health reasons, with Elena temporarily assuming his public-facing duties while we conduct a search for a new director of external relations." "And if the legal proceedings become public?" Richard pressed. "White-collar crime involving educational charities makes compelling headlines. We'll adapt our strategy as necessary," I assured him. "The Foundation's mission and the children we serve remain our priority. If full transparency becomes necessary to protect that mission, we won't hesitate." Margaret nodded approvingly. "Good. No cover-ups. If this becomes public, we own it, learn from it, and demonstrate our commitment to accountability." She turned to me, her eyes sharp despite her 80-plus years. "Now, about this trust fund for the child. Is that coming from foundation funds?" "Absolutely not," I clarified immediately. "The trust will be established from my personal assets and those joint marital assets covered by our prenuptial agreement. Not a single dollar of foundation money will be diverted." Walter exchanged glances with his brother before addressing me again. "Elena, while your personal matters are your own, I feel compelled to ask, is this course of action necessary? The establishment of the trust, I mean. It's extraordinarily generous given the circumstances." I considered his question carefully. Walter had known me since I was a child climbing trees on my father's estate. His concern came from genuine affection, not judgment. "The child is innocent," I said finally. "Whatever David has done, his child shouldn't suffer for it. And pragmatically speaking, ensuring the child's financial security removes one potential complication from an already complex situation." Marcus nodded, understanding the practical considerations. "The trust structure will also ensure David cannot access those funds directly. They'll be managed by an independent trustee with clear parameters for educational and health expenses." The discussion continued for another hour as we addressed every aspect of the situation: legal, financial, operational, and public relations. With each question answered and each concern addressed, I felt the weight on my shoulders lightening incrementally. These people, this mission, they were the constants in my life, the foundation I had built not just in name but in purpose. As the meeting drew to a close, Walter asked for a moment alone with me while the others filed out. When the room had emptied, he sat beside me, his weathered hands clasping mine with fatherly concern. "Your father would be proud of how you've handled this," he said quietly. "Not just the foundation matters, but the personal ones as well. Showing compassion to the woman and her child, that's the Elena he raised." I felt unexpected tears prick at my eyes. My father had been gone for 15 years, his vision for educational equity living on through the foundation that bore our family name. His integrity had been absolute, his kindness legendary. What would he think of the mess I found myself in now? "I keep thinking I should have seen it sooner," I confessed, allowing my carefully maintained composure to slip just slightly. All those nights he worked late, the unexplained expenses, the gradual distancing, the signs were there. Walter squeezed my hands. "Love makes fools of the wisest among us, Elena. You trusted your husband. That's not a failure of judgment. It's a testament to your capacity for faith in others." Faith that was misplaced, I noted wryly. Perhaps, he acknowledged. But better to have loved and lost than to have lived in suspicion and doubt from the beginning. You gave your marriage a genuine chance. That David couldn't rise to meet your authentic self is his failure, not yours. His words washed over me, soothing something raw and wounded that I had been trying to ignore all day. Behind the controlled confrontation, the methodical documentation, the strategic planning, there was still pain, the simple human hurt of betrayal. What happens now, Walter? I asked, suddenly feeling less like the CEO and more like the young woman who had sought his advice when I first took over the foundation after my father's death. Professionally, everything is mapped out. The legal, strategy, the transition plan, the public messaging. But personally, I'm not sure what comes next. Walter smiled gently. What comes next is what always comes next for you, Elena. You rebuild. You reassess. You recommit to the things that matter. And this time, perhaps, you allow yourself to be fully known from the beginning. As we left the boardroom together, the sun was beginning to set, casting long shadows across the city below. The day that had begun with a doorbell and an unexpected confrontation was ending with a renewed sense of purpose and clarity. My phone buzzed with a text message from Roger. David still at the guest house. Made several calls to Vanessa, all declined. Security in place. I slipped the phone back into my pocket, strangely unburdened by the update. Whatever happened with David now, whether he fought the divorce, contested the financial evidence, or simply disappeared to reinvent himself elsewhere, I was prepared. The foundation was protected. Vanessa and her child would be provided for, and I would be fine. Different, certainly. Wiser, hopefully. But ultimately, still myself. The self I had hidden from David, but that had been there all along, waiting to emerge when the time was right. 3 days after the confrontation, I found myself sitting in a quiet corner of Westfield Cafe, a small establishment far from my usual haunts. I'd chosen it specifically because David would never think to look for me here. The place was charming, but decidedly modest, the kind of coffee shop he'd dismissed as quaint but unnecessary when we'd drive past similar venues. I arrived 15 minutes early, selecting a table near the back that offered privacy while still allowing me to watch the entrance. Old habits from months of vigilance were hard to break. I ordered a simple tea and waited, wondering if she would actually show up. The text had come that morning, unexpected but not entirely surprising. It's Vanessa. Can we talk? Just us. No lawyers, no investigators. I'd suggested this cafe, neutral, ground for a conversation I wasn't entirely sure how to navigate. What do you say to the woman carrying your husband's child when the initial shock has worn off? At precisely noon, Vanessa walked through the door. She was dressed more casually than when she'd appeared on my doorstep. Jeans, a loose blouse that disguised any hint of her pregnancy, hair pulled back in a simple ponytail. Her eyes scanned the cafe until they found me, and she made her way, over with determined steps. "Thank you for meeting me," she said, sliding into the chair across from mine. Up close, I could see the shadows under her eyes, partially concealed by makeup but telling nonetheless. She hadn't been sleeping well. That made two of us. "Of course," I replied, gesturing to the menu. "Would you like something? They make excellent sandwiches here." She seemed surprised by the mundane offer, as if she'd expected our interaction to be more fraught with tension. Sure, thank you." We ordered, a Mediterranean wrap for her, nothing additional for me, and then sat in awkward silence until the server retreated. "David's been calling me," she finally said, her fingers nervously tracing patterns on the wooden tabletop. "Multiple times a day. Texts, voicemails, emails from new addresses when I block the old ones." I nodded, unsurprised. He's nothing if not persistent when he wants something. He says you set him up, that the financial improprieties were accounting, errors that you manipulated to look worse than they were, that you were always controlling and manipulative, and this was your ultimate power play. She looked up, meeting my eyes directly. I'm not saying I believe him. I just needed to hear your side without everyone else around. I appreciated her directness. It was refreshing after years of David's elaborate evasions. The documentation speaks for itself, I replied evenly. Every transaction is recorded, every diversion of funds traceable. The Foundation's independent auditors have verified the findings. David didn't make accounting errors. He systematically misappropriated funds for personal use. She nodded slowly, seeming to accept this. And the rest? Your marriage? Were you really hiding your identity all those years? It was a fair question, one that required more vulnerability than I'd planned for this meeting. But something about Vanessa's straightforward approach made me want to respond in kind. I didn't hide who I was, exactly, I explained, wrapping my hands around my teacup. I simply didn't correct David's assumptions. When we met, I was teaching at Westridge Academy, a legitimate position I held because I believe in being involved in the educational work we fund. David assumed that was my career rather than a personal choice. And you let him think that. Yes, I acknowledged. After previous relationships where men were clearly interested in my family's resources rather than me, I was cautious. I wanted to know that David loved me for myself, not my position or my money. Vanessa absorbed this, her expression thoughtful. So you never actually lied to him? Not directly. I simply allowed him to believe what he wanted to believe. When he assumed my family's lumber business was a small operation rather than the multi-million-dollar enterprise it had been, I didn't correct him. When he presumed I had modest savings rather than substantial investments, I didn't enlighten him. The server returned with Vanessa's wrap, momentarily pausing our conversation. When we were alone again, she took a small bite, then set the wrap down. He told me you couldn't have children, she said quietly. That it was a source of tension in your marriage. Was that true? The question stung more than I expected. That was a deliberate lie, I replied, unable to keep a slight edge from my voice. We agreed to wait until the Foundation's expansion was complete before starting a family. There are no fertility issues on my side. My doctor confirmed that just last year during my annual checkup. Vanessa winced. I'm sorry. That was personal. I shouldn't have. It's all right, I assured her. Given the circumstances, you have every right to ask questions. David told you what served his narrative, that I was somehow deficient as a wife, making his infidelity more understandable. She nodded, taking another small bite of her wrap. He's good at that, creating narratives that make his actions seem reasonable, even noble. He told me he stayed with you out of a sense of loyalty, that leaving would devastate you emotionally. I couldn't help the small, bitter laugh that escaped. Meanwhile, he was telling me he was working late on Foundation projects when he was actually with you or Jessica or Megan or Sophia. There were really that many others? Vanessa asked, her voice small. I'm afraid so, I confirmed gently. The investigators documented at least 4 concurrent relationships over the past year, including yours. Each woman believed she was the only one. She set down her wrap, appetite apparently gone. I feel so stupid. All those times he couldn't see me because of Foundation emergencies or donor meetings. He was likely with someone else, I finished for her. It wasn't your fault, Vanessa. David is exceptionally skilled at compartmentalizing his life. She met my gaze, a new determination in her eyes. I've decided to keep the baby. I wanted you to hear it from me directly. I never doubted you would, I replied honestly. From the moment you placed your hand on your stomach in my entryway, I could see your protective instinct. David says he wants to be involved, she continued. He's talking about joint custody, about being a family once things settle down with you and the foundation. I considered my response carefully. I could easily paint David as a monster, highlight all the reasons he would make a terrible father. But that wasn't my place, and it wouldn't serve Vanessa or her child in the long run. That's between you and David, I said finally. The trust fund will be established regardless of what relationship you choose to maintain with him. Your child's security isn't contingent on your personal decisions. Vanessa studied me, genuine confusion in her expression. Why are you being so decent about all this? Most women would hate me, would try to punish David by fighting the trust fund, by making things difficult. It was a variation of the question she'd asked in my living room, but this time in the quiet cafe without lawyers and investigators present, it felt more genuine, more deserving of an honest answer. My father taught me that how we respond to betrayal reveals more about our character than how we respond to loyalty, I said after a moment. Punishing you or your child for David's actions would be misplacing responsibility. It would also be fundamentally contrary to the values I try to live by and that guide the Foundation's work. Your father sounds like he was a wise man. He was, I agreed, feeling the familiar pang of loss that still surfaced after all these years. He believed that true power wasn't about control or dominance, but about having the resources to help others and the wisdom to do so effectively. Is that why you established the Foundation instead of just enjoying your inheritance? I nodded, surprised by her perceptiveness. Education transformed my father's life. He came from nothing, built a business through sheer determination, and believed knowledge was the greatest equalizer. The Foundation is his legacy as much as mine. Vanessa took a sip of her water, then asked the question I sensed had been on her mind throughout our conversation. What happens now? With you, I mean, after the divorce is finalized. The question caught me off guard. In all the meticulous planning, the documentation, the legal strategy, the Foundation transition, I had given surprisingly little thought to my personal future beyond the immediate aftermath. I'm not entirely sure, I admitted. Professionally, there's plenty to occupy me. The Foundation is expanding into 3 new states next year. Personally, I trailed off, realizing I hadn't allowed myself to think that far ahead. You'll find someone better, Vanessa said with unexpected conviction. Someone who appreciates who you really are, not the image they've created of you. I smiled, oddly touched by her confidence. Perhaps, but I think I'll take some time for myself first. 5 years is a long time to live partly in shadow, artistii. Conversation shifted to more practical matters, the structure of the trust fund, the Foundation's educational programs that might eventually benefit her child, her own career aspirations as a graphic designer. By the time we finished, an unexpected ease had developed between us. Not friendship exactly, but something like mutual respect. As we prepared to leave, Vanessa hesitated, then asked, "Has David tried to contact you? Since that day?" "Only through lawyers," I replied. "He's still staying in the guest house, but we haven't spoken directly." She nodded, gathering her purse. "He's changed his story 3 times in as many days. First you were manipulative and controlling, then you were fragile and he was trying to protect you. Now he's claiming the Foundation was always more yours than his, and he felt sidelined." "And which version do you believe?" I asked, curious despite myself. Vanessa met my gaze steadily. "None of them. I believe what I've seen with my own eyes. A man who lied effortlessly to multiple women, who stole from a children's charity, and who is now desperately trying to salvage his reputation rather than take responsibility for his actions." As we walked out together, an unexpected thought occurred to me. In losing a husband, I might have gained something far more valuable: clarity, certainty, and perhaps even an unusual ally in the woman who had unwittingly helped expose the truth. 1 week after my cafe meeting with Vanessa, I found myself back in the Foundation's boardroom. this time for a very different type of meeting. The morning light streamed through the wall of windows, illuminating the faces of my executive team as they reviewed the fallout from David's abrupt departure. "The transition has been smoother than anticipated," Marcus reported, sliding a folder across the polished table. "Most donors have expressed unwavering support after our private briefings. 2 have increased their annual commitments, citing appreciation for our transparency." I scanned the report, noting with satisfaction that our scholarship applications were up 15%, despite the internal turmoil. The Foundation's mission continued uninterrupted, the real work of changing lives through education proceeding, regardless of my personal drama. "And the audit?" I asked, turning to our new compliance officer, Janet Chen, Walter's granddaughter and a former SEC investigator who had joined us specifically to overhaul our financial controls. "Comprehensive and nearly complete," Janet replied, her efficient tone reminiscent of her grandfather. "We've identified all diverted funds and implemented new approval protocols for executive expenses. The board will receive the full report next week, but I can confirm that the issue was isolated to David's activities. No other improprieties were found." Relief washed over me. The Foundation's integrity had been one of my greatest concerns, not just because it was my family's legacy, but because thousands of students depended on our programs. That the damage had been contained to David's specific actions was the best possible outcome. "Excellent work, everyone," I acknowledged, glancing around the table at these dedicated professionals who had rallied around the Foundation during its moment of crisis. "And the media inquiries?" Sophia consulted her tablet. "Minimal and manageable. The official statement about David's departure for personal and health reasons has been accepted without much questioning. The Chronicle of Philanthropy requested an interview with you for their leadership series, but it's unrelated to recent events. They've been trying to profile the Foundation for months." I nodded, making a mental note to consider the interview request once things settled further. "And legal proceedings?" "Moving forward as anticipated," Sophia confirmed. "The prosecutor has the documentation. Given the clear evidence and David's position of trust, they're taking it seriously. Initial court date is set for next month, though there are early indications his attorney may seek a plea arrangement to avoid trial." This news wasn't surprising. David had always prioritized public image above all else. A messy trial with his misdeeds laid bare would be anathema to him. A quiet plea deal would allow him to retain some control over the narrative, something I knew he would value highly. As the meeting concluded and my team filed out, Sophia lingered behind, her expression suggesting she had something additional to discuss. "Elena, there's a personal matter you should be aware of," she began once we were alone. "David has been making inquiries about the Foundation's origins, specifically about your father's initial funding sources and early board composition." I frowned, setting down my pen. "What kind of inquiries?" "He's requested public records from the state charity registry, tax filings from the first 5 years of operations, and has attempted to contact several former board members, including your father's original attorney." A chill ran through me despite the sunlit room. "He's looking for leverage." Sophia nodded grimly. "That would be my assessment. His legal position regarding the financial improprieties is extremely weak. He may be searching for something, anything, he can use as a counter-narrative." I leaned back in my chair, considering the implications. The Foundation's creation had been straightforward enough. My father had converted the proceeds from selling the family lumber business into an educational endowment. There were no scandals or improprieties to uncover. But David's desperation made him dangerous. "Have any of the former board members spoken with him?" "Not to our knowledge," Sophia assured me. "We've reached out to everyone on his contact list to provide context. Most have declined his requests or referred him back to our legal department." "Keep me informed of any developments," I instructed, gathering my materials. "I doubt he'll find anything useful, but I don't want to be blindsided." "Of course," Sophia agreed, then hesitated before adding, There's one more thing. It's about Vanessa Jordan. My attention sharpened at the mention of her name. Is she all right? She appears to be, but our security team noted that she met with David yesterday at a restaurant downtown. The meeting lasted approximately 2 hours and seemed amicable. The news shouldn't have surprised me. Vanessa had mentioned David was pushing for involvement with the baby, yet something about the development unsettled me. After our candid conversation at the cafe, I'd believed Vanessa understood David's manipulative nature. That's her prerogative, I said carefully. The child's parents will need to establish some kind of working relationship, regardless of our situation. Sophia nodded, though her expression remained concerned. Of course. I just thought you should know. Given the timing coincides with David's increased inquiries about the foundation. The implication hung in the air between us. Could Vanessa be working with David now? Had their meeting at my door been an elaborate setup from the beginning? The paranoid thought flashed through my mind before I firmly dismissed it. The evidence of David's infidelity and financial misconduct was irrefutable, documented by independent investigators long before Vanessa appeared on my doorstep. Thank you for the information, I said, rising from my chair. Please continue monitoring the situation discreetly. If David is building some kind of counter-strategy, I want to be prepared. As I left the Foundation headquarters that afternoon, my phone buzzed with a notification, a text message from an unknown number. Need to speak with you urgently. It's about David and the Foundation. Information you need to know. Could it be Megan from David's gym? Or perhaps Michael, the Foundation's former development officer who had departed shortly after David joined? The vague message set off warning bells. This had all the hallmarks of a potential trap or manipulation. I forwarded the message to Roger, immediately with a brief note. Possible contact from one of David's associates. Advise on response. His reply came within minutes. Investigating source. Recommend no response until verified. Security protocols at home and office remain active. By the time I reached my house, Roger had sent a follow-up. Message traced to Megan Wells. Confirmed relationship with David March-July this year. Background check shows financial distress. 3 months behind on rent, maxed credit cards. Proceed with caution if engaging. The pieces clicked into place. Megan, the personal trainer David had pursued while simultaneously maintaining relationships with Vanessa and at least 2 others. Now apparently in financial trouble and reaching out to me directly. The timing, coinciding with David's inquiries about the Foundation's history, seemed far from coincidental. I was still considering how to respond when my doorbell rang, the second unexpected visitor in less than 2 weeks. This time, however, I checked the security camera before approaching the door. The woman on my porch was in her early 30s, athletically built with blonde hair pulled back in a ponytail. Megan Wells, presumably. How she had obtained my home. Address was concerning, though not entirely surprising given David's previous access to Foundation records. I activated the intercom. Can I help you? She startled slightly at my voice, then leaned toward the speaker. Mrs. Carter, I'm Megan Wells. I need to talk to you about David, about what he's planning. I hesitated, weighing the potential risks against my curiosity, about what David might be planning. After a moment's deliberation, I pressed the intercom again. Wait there, please. I called Roger, explaining the situation and requesting his immediate presence. Then I contacted the security team monitoring the property, instructing them to remain vigilant but not approach unless signaled. Only when these precautions were in place did I finally open the door, maintaining the security chain as a physical barrier, Ms. Wells, I acknowledged. You've gone to considerable trouble to find me. Up close, her distress was evident, darkened circles under her eyes, fingers nervously twisting the strap of her purse, gaze darting past me into the house as if searching for someone. Is he here? She asked, her voice tight with anxiety. David. No, I replied, studying her carefully. David hasn't lived here since his misconduct was discovered. Why are you looking for him? I'm not, she clarified quickly. I'm trying to avoid him. He's been persistent. Calling, texting, showing up at my workplace. Ever since you confronted him, he's been obsessed with finding something he can use against you. This aligned with what Sophia had reported, but I remained cautious. And you're telling me this because he's dangerous when he's desperate, she said, meeting my eyes directly. And because he tried to involve me in his scheme. I considered her for a moment longer, then made a decision. My security consultant will be here shortly. If you're willing to wait for his arrival, we can continue this conversation inside. Relief flooded her face. Yes, of course. Whatever makes you comfortable. I need you to know what he's doing before someone gets hurt. Those words, before someone gets hurt, solidified my unease. David had been many things during our marriage. Manipulative, dishonest, selfish. But physically dangerous? That represented an escalation I hadn't anticipated. As we waited in the entryway for Roger's arrival, Megan's gaze wandered over the art and furnishings that David had once claimed credit for selecting. I wondered what stories he had told her about our marriage, what lies he had constructed to justify their relationship while maintaining his image as the devoted husband. How long did you know David? I asked, breaking the uncomfortable silence. 9 months, she replied, her eyes fixing on a particular painting, an abstract piece that David had actually despised but had hung prominently when entertaining foundation donors. We met at the wellness center where I work. He said he was separated, going through a difficult divorce from a controlling wife who was erratic and unstable. The familiar narrative, David's standard explanation to his paramours about why he couldn't leave his marriage immediately. Always casting himself as the noble victim, staying with a troubled spouse out of duty while finding emotional connection elsewhere. And you believed him, I said, not unkindly. It wasn't a question. At first, she acknowledged, a hint of bitterness entering her voice. He was so convincing, so attentive, always remembered little details, always made me feel like I was the only one who truly understood him. The doorbell rang again. Roger's arrival, right on schedule. After verifying his identity through the security camera, I admitted him, noting the subtle assessment he made of Megan even as he greeted me professionally. Ms. Wells, he acknowledged with a nod. I understand you have information regarding David Carter that may be of concern to Mrs. Carter's security. Megan straightened slightly under his scrutiny. Yes. He approached me 3 days ago, offering to pay off my debts if I would help him restore his reputation, as he called it. He wanted me to sign an affidavit claiming that Elena had known about our relationship all along, that she had essentially approved of it as part of some arrangement between them. We moved from the entryway to the living room, the same space where Vanessa had delivered her bombshell just over a week earlier. How quickly life could change. Now I was sitting across from another of David's women, trying to untangle a new web of manipulation he was spinning. Let me understand this clearly, Roger said, recording our conversation with my permission. David, Carter offered to pay off your debts in exchange for a false statement about his relationship with Mrs. Carter? Megan nodded, perched on the edge of the sofa, the same spot where Vanessa had sat. He said if I would sign an affidavit stating that Elena knew about and approved of our relationship, he would give me enough money to clear my debts and relocate. He claimed it was just to balance the narrative since Elena was exaggerating his misconduct to take control of their joint assets. Did he specify an amount? Roger asked, his tone professionally neutral. $50,000, Megan replied, her fingers twisting nervously in her lap. Half on signing, half when the affidavit was submitted to his attorney. He said it wasn't technically lying because Elena must have known on some level since I'd been to foundation events as his guest. I remembered those events, crowded fundraisers where David had introduced various women as foundation supporters or potential donors. I'd been focused on the actual donors and educational partners, never suspecting that some of these women were intimately involved with my husband. "And you declined this offer," I stated, studying her expression for any hint of deception. "Not immediately," she admitted, her honesty surprising me. "I'm not proud of it, but I considered it. I'm facing eviction, my car's been repossessed, and my mother needs specialized medical care I can't afford. $50,000 would solve everything." "What changed your mind?" Roger inquired, asking the obvious question. Megan took a deep breath. "He showed me the draft affidavit. It wasn't just about claiming Elena knew about our relationship. It included statements about Elena's mental stability, allegations that she had manipulated foundation records to frame David, and suggestions that she had her own affairs that David had graciously overlooked." My fingers tightened around my water glass. The audacity was breathtaking, even for David. "All fabrications, of course." "Obviously," Megan agreed. "But he had similar statements supposedly from other women, Jessica and someone named Sophia. He showed me their signatures, told me they were doing the right thing by countering the false narrative Elena was creating." Roger and I exchanged glances. This was a significant escalation, not just a desperate attempt to salvage his reputation, but a coordinated effort to damage mine and potentially undermine the financial fraud case. "Did he mention anything about Vanessa Jordan?" I asked. Megan frowned slightly. "He said she was being difficult, but would come around once she understood what was at stake. He seemed confident she would eventually support his version of events that," explained the restaurant meeting Sophia had mentioned. "David was working on bringing Vanessa into his scheme, perhaps using her pregnancy and the future of their child as leverage." As Roger continued questioning Megan, my phone vibrated with an incoming call from Sophia. Given her usual preference for text messages, a call suggested urgency. I excused myself to take it in the adjoining study. "Elena, we have a situation," Sophia began without preamble. "Vanessa Jordan just arrived at the foundation offices asking for you. She seems extremely agitated and is refusing to speak with anyone else. Security has her in the visitors' lounge." My mind raced through possibilities. Had David convinced her to participate in his scheme? Was this another confrontation, this time in my professional territory? "I'll be there in 20 minutes, I decided. "Ask Walter to join you with Vanessa. His presence tends to have a calming effect, and alert building security that David Carter may attempt to enter the premises. He is not to be admitted under any circumstances." After briefing Roger about the situation, I arranged for him to continue debriefing Megan while I headed downtown. The Foundation's headquarters gleamed in the late afternoon sun as I arrived, its glass and steel exterior projecting exactly the image of transparency and modernity that I'd envisioned when commissioning the building 5 years earlier. Walter met me in the private elevator lobby, his dignified presence reassuring as always. "She's quite distressed," he reported as we ascended to the executive floor. "But also determined. She refused to elaborate until you arrived, but mentioned something about doctored evidence and protecting her child." When we entered the visitors' lounge, Vanessa rose immediately from the leather sofa. Her face was pale except for 2 spots of color high on her cheekbones. Anger, not embarrassment, I realized. "Thank you for coming," she said, her voice tightly controlled. "I need to show you something." Without further preamble, she placed her phone on the coffee table between us and played a video recording. David's voice filled the quiet room. "It's simple, Vanessa. Sign the affidavit stating that Elena knew about our relationship from the beginning, that she even encouraged it, because she was focused on the foundation and didn't want the obligations of a normal marriage. I'll increase the trust fund by another $1 million, give you full custody without any contestation, and you'll never have to worry about money again." There was a pause, then Vanessa's voice. "And if I refuse?" David's tone changed subtly, warming, with fake concern. Then things get complicated. Elena's been very generous so far, but if she learns that we've been meeting, planning together behind her back, well, that trust fund could disappear very quickly. And custody battles can get so messy, especially when one parent has documented mental health concerns. Mental health concerns? What are you talking about? The prescription bottles in your apartment, Vanessa. Anxiety medication, sleep aids. These things look very concerning to family court judges, especially when they're documented by a concerned co-parent. The recording ended, and Vanessa's eyes blazed with righteous fury. He planted those prescription bottles in my apartment. Yesterday, after our lunch meeting. I've never taken anxiety medication in my life. I found them hidden in my bathroom cabinet this morning and immediately checked for hidden cameras. That's when I discovered this recording device. She placed a small black object next to her phone. He's been recording our conversations, planning to edit them together to create whatever narrative he needs. The calculated malice required for such a scheme was staggering, even knowing what I now did about David's capacity for deception. When was this conversation recorded? Roger asked, having joined us after finishing with Megan. Yesterday afternoon, at the restaurant where we met to discuss the baby, Vanessa replied. He insisted on a booth in the back, said it was for privacy. Obviously, it was so he could record without being observed. I exchanged glances with Sophia, whose expression had transformed from cautious concern to steely determination. This crosses several legal boundaries, she noted. Planting prescription medication, creating fraudulent evidence for a custody dispute that doesn't even exist yet, attempting to manipulate family court proceedings. There's more, Vanessa continued, scrolling through her phone. After finding the recording device, I checked my email history. Someone accessed my accounts remotely and sent emails in my name to the foundation, apparently resigning from a position I was never offered and making veiled threats about exposing the truth about Elena Carter. She showed us the sent emails, dated just 2 days earlier, professional-sounding correspondence that I had never received, presumably caught by our IT security systems as suspicious. The timestamps coincide with when I was at my prenatal appointment, Vanessa added. I have medical records confirming I was in the doctor's office when these were sent. The pieces aligned with Megan's account. David wasn't just trying to save himself. He was constructing an elaborate counter-narrative in which I was the manipulative villain and he the victim of my machinations. He was attempting to turn the women he had deceived against me, using different leverage points for each: financial desperation for Megan, concern for her child's future for Vanessa. This ends now, I said, making a decision that had been building since Megan's unexpected visit. Sophia, contact the prosecutor's office. I want to amend my statement to include this new evidence of witness tampering and evidence fabrication. Roger, coordinate with building security to have David removed from the guest house immediately. His personal items can be delivered to whatever address he provides. Turning to Vanessa, I continued, I'd like your permission to include your recording as evidence. It demonstrates a pattern of behavior that extends beyond financial fraud into potentially criminal manipulation of the legal system. Vanessa nodded without hesitation. Take it. Use it however you need to. I want him stopped before he does this to someone else. As the others sprang into action, Walter drew me aside, his weathered hand resting gently on my shoulder. Elena, are you certain about removing him from the guest house? It eliminates our ability to monitor his activities. I'm certain, I replied, feeling a clarity I hadn't experienced in months. Keeping David close was a practical decision when I needed to contain the damage. But allowing him to remain on my property now would send the wrong message. To him, to the women he's tried to manipulate, and to myself. Walter studied me for a moment, then nodded with approval. You're right. Some ties need to be severed completely. The next few hours passed in a blur of purposeful activity. David was escorted from the guest house by security, his protests falling on deaf ears as he was handed formal trespass notices for both my home and the foundation headquarters. The prosecutor's office received our amended statement along with the new evidence, prompting them to accelerate their timeline for formal charges. By evening, I found myself alone in my office, watching the city lights emerge as dusk settled over the skyline. A soft knock at the door interrupted my reflection. "Come in," I called, expecting Sophia with another update. Instead, Walter entered carrying 2 cups of tea, a tradition from my childhood visits to his home, where he and my father would discuss foundation business while I did homework at a corner of their massive dining table. "I thought you might need this," he said, placing a steaming cup on my desk. "It's been quite a day." I accepted the tea gratefully, the familiar bergamot scent, bringing unexpected comfort. That's an understatement. Walter settled into the chair across from me, his movements deliberate in the way of someone who has learned the value of considered actions over a long lifetime. "Your father would be proud of how you've handled all this," he said after a moment. "Not just the professional aspects, but the personal as well, particularly your treatment of the women David deceived." "I couldn't justify punishing them for his actions," I replied, wrapping my hands around the warm cup. "They were victims of his manipulation as much as I was, just in different ways." Walter nodded sagely. That perspective requires wisdom that many never achieve. The ability to see beyond your own pain, to recognize the humanity in others who might easily be cast as adversaries. We sat in comfortable silence for a few minutes, watching the city transition from day to night. Finally, Walter spoke again, his tone thoughtful. "What will you do now, Elena, after the legal proceedings are concluded and the foundation transitions are complete?" It was the same question Vanessa had asked in the cafe, but coming from Walter, who had known me my entire life, it carried different weight. "I'm not entirely sure," I admitted. "Professionally, there's always more to be done with the foundation. We're expanding into new states, developing innovative programs." "And personally?" Walter pressed gently. I considered the question, allowing myself to look beyond the immediate crisis for perhaps the first time since discovering David's betrayal. "I think I need to reclaim some things I set aside during my marriage," I said slowly. "My father always taught me that true strength comes from living authentically, something I compromised by hiding aspects of myself from David." "Any particular aspects you're eager to reclaim?" Walter asked, his eyes twinkling with interest. A smile tugged at my lips as I thought about possibilities I hadn't considered in years. I might restart my doctoral research, the work I was doing before I met David, and perhaps travel to visit the international educational initiatives I've only managed remotely. Maybe even teach again, but this time without concealing my connection to the foundation. Walter nodded approvingly. "Living visibly, no more shadows." "Exactly," I agreed, feeling a weight lifting as I articulated these nascent plans. "And establishing the trust for Vanessa's child, ensuring that at least one positive legacy emerges from all this." "Speaking of legacies," Walter said, reaching into his jacket pocket, "I brought something I thought you might want to see again." He handed me a slightly faded photograph I hadn't seen in years. My father standing proudly in front of the foundation's first office, his arm around my teenage shoulders. Both of us were beaming at the camera, the small brass plaque reading Carter Educational Foundation, gleaming in the sunlight behind us. "Your father built the foundation," Walter said quietly, "but you've been its heart from the beginning. Don't forget that in the midst of these difficulties." Tears pricked unexpectedly at my eyes as I traced my father's familiar features in the photograph. "Thank you for this reminder." "One more thing," Walter added, reaching again into his pocket. This time he withdrew a small velvet pouch. "Your mother asked me to give you this when the time seemed right. I think today qualifies." Curious, I loosened the drawstring and tipped the contents into my palm, my mother's sapphire ring, the one she'd worn every day until her passing when I was 23. Beneath it was a folded note in her elegant handwriting. "For Elena, to wear when she's standing firmly in her own power. May it remind you that your worth is inherent, not determined by anyone else's perception. Love transcends, truth endures, and you, my daughter, are stronger than any challenge life presents. All. My love, Mom. I slipped the ring onto my right hand, where it settled as if it had been sized precisely for me. The deep blue stone caught the light from my desk lamp, sending prisms dancing across the polished surface. Perfect timing, I murmured, turning my hand to admire the ring my mother had cherished, a symbol of her independence and strength that now passed to me at the moment I needed it most. Walter smiled with satisfaction. Your mother always did have an uncanny sense for these things. As he left me to my thoughts, I turned toward the windows again, the city now fully illuminated against the night sky. The next days and weeks would bring challenges, legal proceedings, foundation transitions, establishing new boundaries with Vanessa and her child. But for the first time since that fateful doorbell ring, I felt completely centered in my own truth. David's deception had been meant to diminish me, to keep me small and manageable within the constraints of his fiction. Instead, it had ultimately freed me to reclaim the fullness of who I was. Not just Elena Carter, the teacher he thought he'd married, but Elena Carter, the foundation leader, the educator, the woman who stood firmly in her own power. The irony wasn't lost on me. His pregnant mistress showing up at our door had been meant to shatter my world. Instead, it had broken only the illusions, leaving the authentic foundation of my life stronger than before. I touched my mother's ring once more, a silent promise to honor her legacy of strength and integrity. Then I reached for my phone and composed a message to Vanessa. The trust fund paperwork is complete. When you're ready to discuss the details, I'm available. In the meantime, I hope you're taking good care of yourself and your little one. As I sent the message, I realized I was genuinely invested in her well-being, not out of obligation or as a gesture of magnanimity, but because compassion was a choice that honored who I truly was. David had never understood that power didn't come from controlling others. It came from remaining true to your core values, especially in the face of betrayal. That understanding was perhaps the most valuable outcome of this painful chapter, a lesson I would carry forward as I stepped fully into the next phase of my life, eyes open, heart intact, and spirit undiminished by the storm I had weathered.